Are you ready? You think you can tell us what to do? You think you can tell us what to wear? You think that you're better? Well, you better get ready. Bow to the masters. Break it down!
Hi, welcome to the Straight Lions Talk podcast, off-season edition. Your Detroit Lions information center for everything happening Detroit Lions. Today we're going to be talking about the Detroit Lions offense, some of the off-season moves we'd like to see the Detroit Lions make to help that offense maybe get to that next step. It's an offense, the Detroit Lions offense here the last few years has been an offense that's kind of been stuck in the mud. We can't really get it going. Nothing can really get moving. So we think we have some ideas here and some of the moves we'd like to see the Detroit Lions focus on this offseason for optimum success in the 2016 season. Last week our show focused around the Detroit Lions defense, and that's an area we here at Straight Lions Talk feel is one of the biggest needs for the Detroit Lions. Some of the biggest holes the Detroit Lions need to fill is on defense, but there are holes on offense in some areas in the offense that need to be addressed this offseason. And we have some ideas, and we'd like to share them with you guys, and we're going to focus on that part of the Detroit Lions today. The Detroit Lions offense is what we're going to be focusing on. But first, we'd like to start by thanking all of you out there for everything you've done this last year. It's been great. Next week will mark 1 year exactly when we started doing this, so that's just phenomenal. It's gotten way bigger than we thought it would in 1 year. We just did it to get our voice out there, and we like some of the ideas we had, and some of the people we've talked to in our area like the ideas, and we started this podcast, and it's been great, and the response has been wonderful. The last 3 weeks of shows have been the best viewed shows we've had in this entire spectrum of podcasting. And that's only because of you guys. And we just really appreciate it. We want to say thank you. And just please keep doing what you're doing. Keep sending it out to your friends, your family, your coworkers, Lions fans, whoever it may be. Just keep doing that. It's been working great. We really appreciate it. And I'm glad you guys like the show. It's been wonderful here. We've really enjoyed it. But if you guys want to follow us, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on Instagram, Vine, Spreaker. And you can follow us on iTunes and Stitcher. And you can follow us there at every address is the same, STR Lions Talk Podcast, every one of them. So you have a variety of different ways, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, Vine, Spreaker, iTunes, or Stitcher. You can follow us in a variety of different formats. That is for you guys. So you guys have easy access to all of our shows, and check them out. And please, if you do like us, follow us on Twitter. Leave us a message and a rating on iTunes and Stitcher. We want to be a top 300 show by next year. So please, keep doing what you're doing. Give us a rating. Give us a like. Shoot us a line. That's what we're here for. We want to hear from you guys, the fans. We want to hear your ideas about the Detroit Lions, and we want to talk about it. We want this to be kind of like you're sitting on the couch with a buddy talking, or you're sitting at a bar with a guy talking, having a beer. That's what we kind of want the conversation to devolve around. And actually, we just had a guy, Dez and Dad, on Twitter, Dad and Dez on Twitter, shoot us a comment and some of their thoughts on the Detroit Lions and some of the things they'd like to see the Detroit Lions address. And we're going to get to that throughout the show, and we're going to answer that question here on Straight Lions Talk today because it's an offensive line question, and we're going to talk about it. So that's where we stand with the show right now, and we're really appreciative to all you guys out there, and please keep doing what you're doing. Like I said, keep sending it out to everybody. Whatever source of social media you use, send it out. We really appreciate it. Like I said, today we're going to be talking about the Detroit Lions offense. But first, we got to get to Quinn's moves of the week. Well, Bob Quinn, every week, seems to have his name in the headlines for the Detroit Lions ever since he's been taken over as GM for the Detroit Lions. And last week, after our show had been completed, the following day, Quinn announced he would not be retaining Stephen Tulloch for the 2016 season. He will be cut March 9th. I have some thoughts on this. I like the move. I didn't think even though Stephen Tulloch was our leading tackler, he was an asset to the Detroit Lions anymore. I really appreciate everything he did for the Detroit Lions when he came there. It was a big signing at the time. He was one of the best linebackers in the league, and he continued to, keep that reputation somewhere the same. I wouldn't say he was one of the best the last couple 3 years, but he was very consistent. He was a staple of the Detroit Lions defense. He was a good leader, a solid tackler, a good football player, and he was worth the money we invested in him, and I think we got a big return on that investment. And I'm sad to see him go because he did a very good job while he was here for the Detroit Lions, but in the same breath, I think it was time for him to go, and it was a player that I think needed to be move on with the Detroit Lions because his time had run out. He was a liability out there in the field last year. He wasn't competitive in the passing game. People took advantage of it. Teams audibled out of run plays to get into a passing situation to take advantage of Stephen Tulloch being on the field. He was more of a liability on the field than an asset. And when that happens, it's time to go. And Bob Quinn made that decision, which is the right decision. It saved us around $6 million. We currently stand about $35 million of available assets for us this offseason to go and sign free agents. So I think that's a plus for the Detroit Lions. I really like that. It's going to help us address a lot of needs, and a lot of those needs we're going to talk about here in a few minutes on the Detroit Lions offense like we did last week with the Detroit Lions defense. But another move the Detroit Lions made this last week in Bob Quinn, they released C.J. Mosley, defensive tackle. But that's, again, another position and another player the Detroit Lions are going to have to bring in to fill that hole. C.J. Wilson, a very productive player at times, didn't play a lot this last season, but he was okay. He did okay for the time he was in there, but wasn't really effective for the Detroit Lions this last season. It was time for him to move on. Also, the Lions also announced that Manny Ramirez, offensive lineman guard, will not be back with the Detroit Lions in the 2016 season. That's going to be a hole that needs to be filled. I kind of thought he would be back next year. I've heard some people say that they were glad Manny Ramirez was gone. I didn't have a problem with him coming back in the role he was playing last year. He helped out a lot. He filled a need for the Detroit Lions in a lot of different areas on the offensive line. He could play guard, he could play center, and he filled in all those roles at one time or another last season for the Detroit Lions, which is a huge piece of the puzzle in that position area for the Detroit Lions to have a guy like Manny Ramirez on the roster. And I kind of thought he'd be back. You know what? He could be back. Maybe he comes in at a lower price. Maybe it was just about money and the money he was going to make this next season. I didn't think it was a huge number. I think it was like $3 million. I didn't think it was something that was really devastating to the Lions, but maybe they want to bring him in at a cheaper price. I don't have a problem with that. But I think this is, again, cutting C.J. Mosley, cutting Stephen Tulloch, cutting Manny Ramirez, and having all the free agents we have, it's another piece of the puzzle, another player the Detroit Lions are going to have to address this offseason, which is fine, but that's a lot of pieces the Detroit Lions are going to have to try to put together with a $35 million spending limit in the offseason. That sounds like a lot, but when you start signing guys, $2, $3, $4, $5, $7 million, it dissipates very quickly, and you have to save some of that money to sign guys like Ezekiel Ansah, Devin Taylor, if you want to bring him back, Darius Slay, if you want to extend those guys and get them a year early into the free agent market than a year late, like they did Sue. There's a lot of things the Detroit Lions have to address this offseason, and there's going to be a lot of turnover on this roster. This roster is going to look a lot different, like we talked about last week, and we thought it was going to look a lot different on the defensive side of the ball, but there are a lot of holes to fill with this team. We have to remember something. Bob Quinn is not taking over a team that's going to look anything like it did last year, and maybe that's part of the, part of why he wanted to be the GM for the Detroit Lions. Maybe he liked that there was a lot of turnover happening. He could get a lot of his guys in here and a lot of his theories about how to build an organization into the Detroit Lions. Maybe that was the big calling card for him. It's looking like a mini rebuild, just a little bit. We have some core players. We have Stafford. We have Golden Tate. We have a young offensive line with Larry Warford, Laken Tomlinson, and Travis Swanson. Now, you can, throw your arrows at those guys, whatever. You have, like I said, Darius Slay, Ezekiel Ansah, Devin Taylor, Quinn in the secondary. You have Nevin Lawson. You have Quandre Diggs. You have some pieces, but the depth is starting to dissipate for the Detroit Lions in this offseason. The guys that we were counting on in prior seasons, guys like, Tier Whitehead, Stephen Tulloch at one time was someone we really relied on. Rashean Mathis was someone we really relied on for a long time. These pieces are all gone. Pieces we have to fill. Jason Jones, a very effective player last year. All these pieces need to be addressed, and we are going to have new pieces on the defensive line. We're going to have new pieces on the offensive line. And, some people are going to cheer for that. But careful what you wish for a little bit, because maybe we won't get a player of Manny Ramirez's caliber. I believe we will, but you never know. You bring some of these guys in, you have expectations for them, and sometimes they don't meet those expectations. But today, like I said, we're going to be focusing on the Detroit Lions offense and some of the needs the Detroit Lions have to address this offseason with the offense in particular. And one of those needs is at quarterback. And I'm not talking Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford is our quarterback of the future, guys. Like it or not, he is the staple, and he is the person that's going to push this cart going forward. He's the one that's going to get us over the hump. For all of you out there thinking there's a better quarterback, whether it's in this year's draft, next year's draft, wherever it may be, there's not. There's not a better quarterback than Matthew Stafford coming out this year. If Matthew Stafford hit the open market, if the Detroit Lions said, hey, you know what? If you heard news today that they were going to part ways, the Detroit Lions were going to part ways with Matthew Stafford, he would be picked up so fast, and he would be the hottest commodity on the free agent market this offseason. He would be bigger than anyone. Even if Von Miller came out, teams would go after Matthew Stafford before they went after Von Miller. Teams that need a quarterback, the LA Rams, the Browns, the Texans, they would all throw hundreds of millions of dollars his way. I mean, that contract could be in the realm of, $100 to $150 million. He's still 28 years old. He'll be 28 in March. You just have to realize how talented he is. He's one of the top arm talents in this league. He has all the attributes to be a quarterback, and he has the attributes to be a quarterback that can lead the Detroit Lions into the playoffs, as he's done, but get wins. He can get us to a Super Bowl, and I believe he can win a Super Bowl for us. Did you guys really think Matthew Stafford was worse than Peyton Manning? Do you think Matthew Stafford could have done a better job with Denver in the Super Bowl? I do. If you switch Peyton Manning out for Matthew Stafford, I believe Matthew Stafford would have had a better game in that Super Bowl than Peyton Manning did. Peyton Manning is a very intelligent quarterback, obviously, but, his days come. You don't think Denver would jump at the chance to get a Matthew Stafford in after Peyton Manning leaves with that defense they have? Are you kidding me? John Elway would beat the door down to get Matthew Stafford in the door. So, with all that said, the position we wanted to address was backup quarterback for the Detroit Lions. That's the position I'm most worried about for the Detroit Lions in the 2016 season. Our backup quarterback last year was Dan Orlowski. Woohoo! And he has a connection to Randy Edsall. He was his guy when Edsall was there at Connecticut, and he probably got him overdrafted with the success Edsall and Orlowski had at Connecticut in the early days when Edsall was taking over being a coach for the University of Connecticut. But Orlowski's a free agent this offseason, so we have to address that. And I don't know where we can address that position, but I think we have to address it in free agency. I don't believe we can address it through the draft. Now, I'll say this. If the Detroit Lions decide to keep 3 quarterbacks this offseason, this season, as last year they only kept 2, then I should think the Detroit Lions should draft a quarterback. But in free agency, I'd like to see the Detroit Lions go after someone like a Colt McCoy, a Matt Schaub, a Matt Flynn possibly, someone like that for the backup role for the Detroit Lions. Maybe even a Jimmy Clausen, someone like that. My pick, if I had to pick right now for the Detroit Lions to have a backup quarterback, would be Colt McCoy. Because if something happens to Matthew Stafford, he gives us a legitimate chance to have the season not be a complete failure. And that's what we're looking for. If you go draft a guy and Matthew Stafford gets hurt week 2 and he's out for the season, then you have a rookie quarterback playing that season. And that doesn't benefit the Detroit Lions. So I think it has to be a veteran presence. And I think we need to upgrade that veteran presence from Dan Orlowski to maybe a Colt McCoy, maybe a Matt Hasselbeck, maybe, Matt Flynn, like I said, Matt Schaub, someone like that has a lot of veteran experience, has started in the league before and understands the league and can catch on, to the system. I think that would benefit the Detroit Lions greatly this offseason if Matt Flynn, Colt McCoy, or a Matt Schaub came into the Detroit Lions as the backup quarterback. Now, with that said, like we talked about a minute ago, the Detroit Lions drafting a quarterback, and that seems to be a point of contention this year going into the draft, that the Detroit Lions, a team that hasn't drafted a quarterback in 7 years, and that's an NFL record for not drafting a quarterback in 7 consecutive drafts, the Detroit Lions, ever since drafting Matthew Stafford, has not drafted a quarterback. That's an NFL record. Can you believe that? It's only the Detroit Lions, right? And, with that said, I don't want the Detroit Lions to overdraft a quarterback. I don't want them to take a quarterback in the 3rd round of Dak Prescott. While I like Dak Prescott, I don't like Dak Prescott in the 3rd round. I like Dak Prescott in the 6th round. And I don't have a problem with the Detroit Lions using one of their 6th round picks, 7th round picks on a guy like Dak Prescott, a Trevon Boykin, someone like that to come in and sit on the bench and learn. And I'm not looking for him to be the quarterback of the future. I'm not looking for him to be, the heir apparent to Matthew Stafford. I'm looking for someone that is the complete opposite of Matthew Stafford, someone that can do things that Matthew Stafford can't, like run the football, extend plays with his legs. Give a team, if Matthew Stafford happens to get hurt early in a game, let's say, and Colt McCoy, let's say we sign him, he comes in, he's not having a great game, and you decide to bring in a Trevon Boykin, and he comes in, he can do things that a defense won't be planning for, things that will frustrate a defense with his legs. He's not very accurate. He's he's a decent quarterback. He has a lot of great attributes for college, but I don't know if they all translate to the pros, but there's a lot of things he can do that can give defenses fits in the pros. And a guy like Dak Prescott, a guy that actually played a lot better this year from the pocket. He struggled at times. Well, Mississippi State wasn't exactly a perennial power. He still played very well for a guy that was, for all points, a Tim Tebow clone in the Mississippi State offensive system. That's what they kind of like to do there. They like to get a guy that has his size and some of the things he brings to the table. But I think Boykin and Dak Prescott would be great picks for the Detroit Lions. But I like those in the 6th round, not in the 3rd round. I don't want the Detroit Lions to overreach for a quarterback. Now, if a guy like, Connor Cook or something falls to them in the 2nd round, maybe you'd kick the tires on something like that, or a Paxton Lynch or something like that. If he's sitting there and you think, hey, maybe we bring him in and we develop him, like someone like Paxton Lynch would be ideal for that, because he's a guy that does need some development. And I think if he fell to us in the 2nd round, I wouldn't be terribly upset if they did that, but I think there's other areas of need for the Detroit Lions right now other than quarterback with that high of a pick. And for everyone out there saying we should go get RG3, let's just put that to bed right now. No, we're not getting RG3. That would be terrible. Can you imagine if Matthew Stafford had a bad game and the people saying, why didn't you bring RG3 in? He could start something with his legs. Oh, we should bring RG3 in. He's a better option. He can throw the ball deep more often. Remember his rookie year? Can you imagine all those comments? So you can't bring in a top-flight quarterback, an RG3 or some of the bigger names. Maybe someone gets cut this offseason. You bring him in as the backup. No, it's got to be a guy like Colt McCoy, a guy like that, they can't be an RG3 type. And I don't want to overreach, go and get it like a Connor Cook in the second round if he falls into the second round, which he won't, to take over that backup position. But, if a guy like Paxton Lynch happens to fall, because it seems like some of the love has came off Paxton Lynch here in the last month for some of the things that they're noticing he, maybe needs a little more development. If a guy like that was there, fine. I guess I wouldn't have a problem with it. You're getting a lot of value for that pick, but I'd like to see us address the defense and the defensive line with that pick because the draft is so deep. Another area of need because of the release of Joique Bell is running back, and it's an area of need we need to address. I know we have Zach Zenner, and that Dad and Dez at Daz and Dez on Twitter made a comment that he didn't like some of the bashing we gave Zach Zenner last week on one of our shows. I love that. I'm glad Dad and Dez reached out to us and made those comments. And here's what I have to say to that. I don't get it. I feel like it's Krispy Kreme donuts or Cracker Barrel. It's okay, but in my opinion, they're not that great. I really don't like Krispy Kreme donuts. I don't think they're all that great. I don't understand the love behind it. I don't get it. I don't see why people think they're so good. I'd rather have a Sweetwater's donut. I'd rather have a Westco donut. That's what I would prefer. I don't get the love for Krispy Kreme donuts. And along with Cracker Barrel, people rave about Cracker Barrel. It's a good meal, but it's not my 10th choice. It's not my 20th choice probably. There's probably a lot of different places I'd rather go than Cracker Barrel to get a meal. It's okay, but don't tell me how great it is, because it's not all that great. And I feel like I have to apologize for saying I don't like Zach Zenner, and I don't get what people like about him. Is it because he's a white dude playing running back and he did okay in the preseason? Okay, I mean, that's what people throw in my face a lot of times. Hey, look how great he was last year in the preseason. Okay, aren't you the same people that say the preseason doesn't matter? And then when Matthew Stafford led the league last year in quarterback rating and had the best preseason of a quarterback last year in the preseason, weren't you guys the same guys that saying, the preseason doesn't matter, it's just preseason? So I could say the same thing about Zach Zenner. I don't get it. I think he's a good player, but I don't think he's the missing link for the Detroit Lions running back situation. I hear a lot of people say, no big deal. We got rid of Joique Bell, and we got Zach Zenner. He'll take over that power role, and I think he'll be better at it. Okay, I just don't see it. I just don't see him being the answer for the Detroit Lions running back woes in the power situation for a running back. I don't get it. So that's my only thing. I just don't get the Zach Zenner love. So I'd like to see the Lions do something else there. I'd like to see the Lions draft a running back, a guy like a CJ Proheis. Maybe go out in free agency, get a guy like, let me see here. Who do we have? A Ronnie Hillman possibly, or a Stephen Ridley could be a possibility for the Detroit Lions. A lot of different players. Alfred Morris, I'd rather see him come in and get rid of Zach Zenner. I don't get it. I don't understand the love for Zach Zenner, but I think this is a position the Detroit Lions need to address definitely in the offseason. Now, having Theo Riddick and having Amir Abdullah is great. I like both those backs. Theo Riddick has exceeded my expectations greatly. He's a player I wasn't super high on, and maybe I will be wrong about Zach Zenner too. I like Theo Riddick coming out of college, but I wanted Andre Ellington. I thought he was the better player of the two. But, looking at it now, I'd say they're equal parts the same player. I think they've had equal parts the same success in the league. But the one thing Theo Riddick has going for him is he stays healthy where Andre Ellington doesn't. So, it was the right pick. And I want to be wrong about Zach Zenner is the thing. That's what I'm saying to you guys. I want him to be a contributor to the Detroit Lions. I want him to be effective. I want him to have ultimate success, because that leads to ultimate success for the Detroit Lions. So I want to be wrong about Zach Zenner. The problem is I don't think I'm wrong about Zach Zenner. It's kind of the Corey Fuller thing. Everyone kept telling me how great Corey Fuller was and he was going to break out. I never understood the love of Corey Fuller because he was really fast. Okay, he can't run a route. He doesn't have elite hands. He doesn't do anything that is special at the wide receiver position. He's just a guy. And I feel that same way about Zach Zenner. He's a great story. Small school guy, a white dude. You don't have a lot of white running backs in the league. And, that makes everyone feel good. He looks like your neighbor. He looks like your son. He looks like, whoever on the streets. So that makes people feel good. Like, hey, that's just like an ordinary guy there playing football. He's not super awesome, but he's pretty good. Tough kid. And, maybe he is. I just don't see the love. So I'd rather address that situation in the draft. I think there's a lot of running backs there for the Detroit Lions to have. Like I said, a lot of people always say you don't need to draft a running back in the first round. You hear draft analysis people say that that's just a waste of a pick to even draft a running back in the first round. You can get the same talent in other areas, of the draft. So I'd like to see the Detroit Lions. C.J. Prohyse is our pick. That's someone I think that would be a very good pick for the Detroit Lions going into next season. He's someone I really like. I think he would bring a lot of different attributes that Joique Bell couldn't bring to the Detroit Lions. He's a better receiver out of the backfield. He is a good blocker on third downs. He's a great pass catcher. He has very soft hands. He can run between tackles. That's the pick. I think we could steal him in the 5th round. And I'm not saying we could possibly have 3 5th-round picks. I think we could use the 2nd, maybe even the 3rd one to get him. I don't think he's a hot commodity. I think people are overlooking him. And I think that's a player the Detroit Lions could snag and have a ton of success with in the 2016 season, as they did with Theo Riddick, 2 Notre Damers. So I really like that. That's where I'd like to see the Detroit Lions go with the running back position. The biggest point of contention for the Detroit Lions this last offseason, besides Matthew Stafford early in the season, was the Detroit Lions offensive line. That was a major issue. It was a position I felt the Detroit Lions were going to be better at the beginning of the year because of the youth they had on the offensive line. It was an area we thought that they would grow into. I thought they'd struggle initially, and then they'd pick it up. And it didn't happen. They struggled from the start. And it happened in the second half of that San Diego Charger game, and when everything fell apart, it all started with the offensive line. Early in the game, they were opening up monster holes. San Diego made some adjustments, and they figured out the piece of that puzzle that confused the Detroit Lions. And then we started taking 3 guys to block 1, and guys weren't even blocking guys that were coming free on blitzes, and sometimes it wasn't even blitzes and guys were running free. It's other person's assignment. So whatever the problem was, Joe Lombardi, Matthew Stafford, whatever it is, you could see glaring needs for the Detroit Lions on the offensive line. With that said, I don't think the Detroit Lions should cut Riley Reiff. I think he should stick around for another season. He was the best offensive lineman for a group that was poor last year for the Detroit Lions. He was rated the best. He got the Offensive Lineman Award for the Detroit Lions organization in the offseason. He's someone I like. Okay, I'm not in love with Riley Reiff. I think he's serviceable. But with all the needs the Detroit Lions had this offseason, I think trying to attack the left tackle position would be a tough way to go for the Detroit Lions, because if you address it in free agency, it's going to cost a ton of money. And maybe that's money that could be allocated towards the defensive side of the ball when you don't have to make a problem where there's really not too much of a problem. Could it be upgraded? Yes. But is it serviceable and adequate for what we need it to be this year with only 1 year left on his contract? Yes. He's only $8 million. I know a lot of people want him to kick over to the right side, wants to go out and get Okun or Glenn or Clady or something like that, and get this big name left tackle, and that'll solve all the problems. And maybe it will. I'm not going to be mad if we do it, but I don't see Quinn going after a left tackle for $10 million a year, $12 million a year. I just don't see it. I think he's going to address that in free agency, but a cheaper way in free agency, I think he'll address the offensive line. That is, not the left tackle position, but the offensive line in general. I think we're going to add pieces, but I think those pieces have to become as free agents. I don't think we can draft another young guy. We have plenty of young guys in the line. I think we need a veteran presence on the line. You know, maybe we go out and get an Alex Mack if he comes in cheap enough, or maybe we can go get a right tackle to, fill that glaring void that's been there for the last 10 years. It seems like that we can never get that right tackle position solidified. Maybe Quinn can find someone that can be very serviceable over there. They don't have to be all pros. They don't have to be. They just have to be serviceable. Don't be the worst in the league at that position. Be 15th, be 10th. It doesn't have to be number one. I'd like it to be. If they can find that guy, great, bring him in. But just make it so it's serviceable. I don't think this offensive line's that far away. I think they need to be coached up a little bit better. We have a new offensive line coach coming in. I think that's going to help. So I'd like to see the Detroit Lions address the offensive line through free agency. That's where we'd like to see them address it. I don't really want us to attack the offensive line within the draft because there's not a ton of offensive line draft talent in this year's draft. It's pretty weak, and there's some guys that are nice, but again, when one of our biggest needs is defense and defensive line in particular, I think you should address the defensive line in the draft this year because it's a defensive line heavy draft. It's a defensive line heavy free agent pool. That's where I think the best money can be spent for the Detroit Lions in the 2016 season is on defense in the draft and in free agency. That's where I think that they'd make the most hay with their money. And that's where we'd like to see it. We think we need a veteran presence on that offensive line, not a bunch of rookies that need time to develop. You saw what happened with Laken Tomlinson last year, and the book's still out on him. A lot of people think he's peaked. He's where he's at. I'm going to say I hope not. But he wasn't as impressive as he was presented to us about all of his attributes and the way people talked him up during the draft. He's a smart guy, but there's a lot of room for improvement. He definitely needs to get stronger is one of his biggest issues this offseason. His strength, he got beat up pretty bad in a lot of different areas. So this brings us to the wide receiver position, probably the biggest area of concern for the Detroit Lions and their fans, but more their fans than the Detroit Lions themselves. We here at Straight Lions Talk don't think this is such an area of concern. I think it will be addressed in free agency. There are very serviceable receivers out there, and I don't think Quinn is going to overpay for any of them. So the people that think we're going to go out and get Alshon Jeffrey, I would be very, very shocked if Quinn spends that kind of money on Alshon Jeffrey. It would really shock me coming into this next season. I see us doing more of the Jermaine Kearse role, maybe Ricardo Lockett, David Nelson, Ruben Randall, Mohamed Sanu, Marvin Jones, guys like that. Possibly maybe a Victor Cruz if he gets let go by the New York Giants. That could be a possibility if he's healthy. He hasn't been healthy the last couple of years. If he can stay healthy, I think he would be great for the Detroit Lions. I'd love to see Cruz and Tate on each side of each other because I think that's, and we've said this 100 times on this show, I believe that's where the league's going. I don't think it's going to be so much predicated on speed anymore as it is on quickness. Guys like, Golden Tate, Antonio Brown, guys that can make you miss in space and be able to have the ability to make that move and then get into the end zone from a variety of different venues on the offensive side of the ball. I don't see this. I think the days of the Calvin Johnson type receiver, I think GMs are going away from that. We said this before, and that's why I'm not so worried with the whole Calvin Johnson retirement thing, because I think there are receivers out there that can be a Golden Tate type receiver that can catch a bubble screen, make a guy miss, get 15 yards, in the same breath, catch a 15-yard pass, make a couple guys miss, and get into the end zone from 20 yards out. there's a lot of things. The run after the catch, I think, has become a bigger point for the Detroit Lions than the Calvin Johnson, throw it up to him and see what happens role that he had with the Detroit Lions. Not a great route runner, Calvin Johnson. He's not great after the catch. They kept trying to throw bubble screens to him early in his career, and I understand why you would, but he's not great after the catch, and I never understood that. I think you need guys that are more quick than fast, and I'd like to see the Detroit Lions address that. Even in the NFL draft, our favorite receiver in this draft is Doxson out of TCU. Josh Doxson. I think he is the best receiver in this class. I think Will Fuller's number 2. I like Laquan Treadwell, but there's things that scare me because I don't know what player he's going to be. Is he going to be Larry Fitzgerald, or is he going to be J.J. Stokes? And for all you guys that know who J.J. Stokes is, he's a guy that in college was awesome. He looked like the next great receiver coming into this league. Big, caught everything in college, had the height, had the weight, thought he had the speed, but he didn't. That was the problem. And there are rumors coming out, Treadwell maybe doesn't run that fast. And the problem with that is he's not that tall. He's not Calvin Johnson tall. Why he does have long arms, he has a big catch radius. He can't get off pressure. He can't run away from a defender. Where you get a guy like a Will Fuller where he has that speed and that ability to run a variety of different routes. He can make things happen. He can set up cornerbacks and then get away from them after he sets them up on offense. And this is who we like. We like Josh Doxson from TCU. That's our number 1 wide receiver we'd like to see the Lions take if they take a wide receiver. We like Will Fuller out of Notre Dame. We like Sterling Shepard out of Oklahoma. That's our top 3 in the receiver category. Those are the ones we would like to see the Detroit Lions target. I really don't even want to take a shot at, Treadwell. I don't see the love. I don't see. He's like, Zach Zenner. I don't get it. I think he's a very good player, and I think he'll be okay in the pros, but I don't think he's going to be anything special. I don't think he deserves the first-round grade he's getting. Now, if the Lions take him, I hope to God I'm wrong, because I'd love to be wrong if that's the case. Another position the Detroit Lions need to address this offseason is tight end, because we do have Eric Ebron, and he is a player that needs to step up and needs to keep showing progress in his development, as he did a little bit this last year. He looked okay. He wasn't terrible. He wasn't awesome, but he wasn't terrible. But it's another area of need the Detroit Lions need to address, because we're uncertain of the health of Brandon Pettigrew. Where's he at in his rehab development? He's been injured the last few years. He's really a non-factor in the passing game. But he is very, very serviceable in the blocking schemes the Detroit Lions like to run with their tight ends. Some options the Detroit Lions could have. Jared Cook of the Los Angeles Rams was let go this last week. Strong possibility there for the Detroit Lions. I think he'd be a very good player. He can block. He's adequate at catching passes. He's always that player that in fantasy football, at least, everyone always wants to draft because he has that 1 or 2 big games a year, and everyone thinks he's about ready to break out. Could he come to the Detroit Lions in an offense with a better quarterback, be more of a threat down the field, and be more of an effective tight end in the NFL with a player like Matthew Stafford in a scheme that likes to throw the ball to the tight end, as Jim Bob Cooter's scheme seemed to like to do last year for the little bits and pieces of it we saw. Another guy the Detroit Lions could go after is maybe a Dwayne Allen. Again, very good blocker, effective pass catcher. They could address it in the draft. The draft is not very deep this year in tight ends, but a guy we really like, and I don't understand why he's not getting more praise. He was not invited to the NFL Combine, is Kyle Carter of Penn State. He's a 6'5", 250-pound tight end. He can play on the outside, as Eric Ebron does. He's not very effective in the passing game, but he has very good hands, runs good routes. Man, I think you could get this guy, Kyle Carter, out of Penn State. I believe you could get him in probably the 7th round, late 6th round. We have 2 6th-round picks. I'd love to use that pick on Kyle Carter. I think he'd be a huge get for the Detroit Lions. I would love that. Absolutely love if Kyle Carter came to us. I don't understand, unless he has an injury I don't know about or a sketchy past, I don't understand why he's not getting more love. I tried looking up stuff on him. There's really not a lot about him. He didn't get invited to the combine. So he's going to fly under the radar. And if you watch his game tape, and we do have that posted on Straight Lions Talk on Twitter at STR Lions Talk, you can find it there. And look it up. Look at it. It's very interesting, and I don't understand why he's fallen as far as he has. But today we want to answer a question. I carried on a conversation with these guys on Twitter for a little bit. It's at Dad and Dez. They asked the question. He says, I think O-line needs to be the priority with how deep the D-line draft is. Your thoughts? Well, Dad and Dez, I think the Detroit Lions should not overreach, as like I said with the quarterback, for an offensive lineman in this draft. I don't think it's a glaring need as much as people are making it out to be. I think these needs on the offensive line can be addressed through free agency. And I think that's where the Detroit Lions should go to address these needs for the facts of the veteran leadership. Sometimes it takes an offensive lineman in the league time to adjust to the NFL, and that's something the Detroit Lions don't have. People have talked about this possibly being a rebuild year for the Detroit Lions, and it kind of looks like it's a mini rebuild year. I could see this team being another 7-9 team. Even though the schedule is a little easier, the Detroit Lions aren't going to be as good as they were last year. Now, Quinn could make some key signings. They could all hit. They could all develop the way he envisions it. And I hope it does, because I'm tired of the losing. And I want this to work. And I like Quinn. I like the way in the direction he's taking this team. He has a workman's attitude. I think he's going to work his butt off. I think he has been working his butt off. He's at the combine currently. And I think offensive line is an area he's going to address in free agency. I don't think it's going to be big name guys, but I do think he's going to address this in free agency. And I would not, to answer the question, I would not address it in the draft. If I did, it'd be very late. It'd be a developmental guy. It'd be maybe a 5th-round pick, maybe our compensation pick for Nick Fairley with it in the 5th round, maybe, depending on who slips, who falls. You know, if I had the choice between C.J. Proheis and offensive lineman, I'd take Proheis. And I understand you need the offensive lineman for C.J. Proheis to have success, and I know that's a big area of need and concern for a lot of Lions fans, but I don't think it's as big a need as the defensive line. If you go look at the defensive line and how decimated that position is going into next season, and the talent available to the Detroit Lions, whether it be in free agency on the defensive line or on the defensive line in the draft, I think this sets up perfectly for the Detroit Lions to set up a big future for themselves going forward on the defensive side of the ball. You know, you can get a guy like Sheldon Rankins, and the thing is, he possibly could slip a little bit, so Lions could trade back, acquire another 2nd-round pick, and potentially pick Rankins between, let's say, 15 or 16 and 25, somewhere in there. If someone wants to move up, if a guy like Connor Cook or Paxton Lynch slip to the Lions spot and someone wants to jump up and take it. You know, a team like the Los Angeles Rams could take a player early in the draft besides a quarterback and come back into the 1st round, use their 2nd-round picks they have, and give them to us. You know, give us one of their 2nd-round picks to move up, or 2 of their 2nd-round picks, or a 1st-round pick next year. You know, a lot of things can develop that way. I'm not trying to get into a bunch of trade talk for the draft. That's not going to probably happen. But to address Dad and Dez's question, no, I would not draft an offensive lineman. The latest I'd do it would be late 5th round. I would not do it before then. I don't think it's that big a need for the Detroit Lions as people are making it out to be. Why it looked bad at times last year, it looked a lot better in the second half on their 6-2 winning streak they had going there at the end of the season. The line looked much improved, and it's an area, like I said, does not need to be addressed as much as people think it does. It needs to be tinkered with. Whereas the defensive line, like we talked about last week in our show, that's a position that the Detroit Lions are going to have to address wholeheartedly. That's a position they're going to have to really focus on this offseason for the Detroit Lions to have success. There's a lot of holes to fill. You know, players like Haloti Ngata, you know, pending retirement possibly. He's thinking about it, but maybe he wants to come back for a year And my thoughts on that, Haloti, dude, you played very well at the end of the season last year. You've had a great career, but if your heart's not in it, please don't come back to Detroit. And I hope Bob Quinn feels that way too, because I like the way Bob Quinn's going, and I think he's bringing a new culture to the Detroit Lions. And I think it's a culture that's not going to give guys paychecks anymore for just wanting to come and play for the Detroit Lions. He's not going to overpay for guys. He's going to find his guys and the guys he wants to bring in at his price. The days of people just getting a paycheck to come here and think they hit the lottery because they oversigned and then you don't have to show up to work are over. That has stopped now that Bob Quinn is here. I truly believe that, and you heard it here first at Straight Lions Talk. So I hope that answered your question, Dad and Des. We here at Straight Lions Talk would not address the offensive line early in the draft. We'd wait till later in the draft, but I think defense needs to be maybe potentially the first 3 picks in this draft for the Detroit Lions, because that's where the depth lies. And when you have that need, take advantage of that depth in the draft for the, there's probably not going to be a defensive line influence draft like this for probably another 10 years. So take advantage of what they're giving you. Don't punch a gift horse in the mouth here and take some, speculation, potentially great offensive lineman if this works out, if that works out. When you got defensive linemen in this draft that are more than likely going to pan out, even in the second round, going into the third round, you can find 10-year starters potentially in these rounds that are going to have a lot of success in the NFL. So that's where we here at Straight Lions Talk would like to see the Detroit Lions go in that direction. The other thing we'd like to talk about is the pending retirement of Calvin Johnson. We don't know what he's going to do. Quinn came out today and said there's no timeline on Calvin Johnson's decision. We've talked about it quite a bit on the show, as a lot of shows have, because it's the big topic of the offseason for the Detroit Lions currently, Megatron retiring. Here's what we have to say. If Calvin Johnson wants to come back for 1 year, I don't want him back. And I don't know why people are saying, just give us 1 more year, Calvin. Just 1 more. I don't understand it. It's the Zach Zenner thing. It's the Krispy Kreme thing. It's the Cracker Barrel thing. I don't get it. Why would you want Calvin Johnson to come back for 1 year? He cost you $11 million. It could potentially save us if he decides to retire. And I don't want him to come back for just his farewell tour. I don't want this to be a Derek Jeter, Kobe Bryant farewell tour around the league where people are giving him gifts on the field and that becomes a big thing. This is football. It's different than baseball. It's different than basketball. And I'm afraid that's what it's going to feel like, as a farewell tour for Calvin. Like a countdown. Could this be Calvin's last catch? Could this be Calvin's last time in Green Bay? Will he come back? And all this, kind of a mini Brett Favre saga that could possibly jump up from this. I don't want that. If Calvin Johnson does not want to be back, and he was thinking about this last year, then just go ahead and retire, Calvin. That's what I'd like to see. I don't want him back if his heart's not 100% into it, and it's not into the future of the Detroit Lions for the long term, because that's where I want this to go. I'm tired of having 11-win seasons every 5 or 6 years and then drop off the map and have a top 10 pick the next 4 or 5. We don't want that anymore. So, if Calvin wants to come back, great. I welcome you back. You're a great asset to have on the Detroit Lions. But if your heart's not in it, Calvin, please don't return just for a farewell tour and for the money. That's our show today. We really appreciate everybody listening to us and everything you've done. Like we said, if you guys want to follow us, the best way to follow us is at STR Lions Talk Podcast on Twitter. And you can follow us in a different variety of formats on social media through Instagram, Vine, Speaker, iTunes, Stitcher. You can follow us at all those. All of those addresses are the same. STR Lions Talk Podcast. We thank everybody for joining us. We will be back next week with another version of Straight Lions Talk, and we don't know what we're going to talk about yet. More than likely, it's going to be about the Combine. We'll get into some of that. Free agency's coming up. Where are the Lions looking? Are there going to be other moves? Who's going to be on the team? Who's not? We'll talk about it. But until then, we'll see you guys next time.